do what your passion is, get things out there, because you don't know when someone will come across your work at the right time for them. And that is, what you're going after. Hello there. Welcome. This is My Next Big Move with Jonathan Essery and Tom Warson. Hit it. Hey, Tom, on the road.
It's true. Coming to you live
from the backyard.
Los Angeles.
Nice. You visiting anyone out there, or?
Yeah. My partner has a bunch of friends and stuff out here, so she's introducing me to some of them, and just gonna enjoy the 4th of July weekend and stuff like that.
Well,
having some fun. Celebrating America's birthday.
Yeah. So, well, are you taking out the rest of the week, or?
No. I'm working.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Cool, man.
Just the beautiful world that we live in.
Which part of LA are you in?
Right now, we're staying with some of her friends who live in the Hollywood Hills. Laurel Canyon.
Hollywood Hills.
Yeah.
Nice.
So it's really beautiful. Yeah, it was at an early morning with the mists over the hills and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it was fun.
That's so cool. Cool, man. Yeah, I've been in LA 3 or 4 or 5 times.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's always something different. The various neighborhoods that are all so compact and different, definitely different people, different culture, kind of influences. But also seems like there's different rules everywhere you go. Certainly for parking.
Yeah. I know. It's I actually lived out here when I was in college. I spent a summer in Long Beach.
Oh yeah.
And being in Denver prior to moving to Texas, it was much more of a Western city, and so LA wasn't too much of a reach. But just I've been to LA a handful of times, and every time I feel like I've been to a different part of the city, and they're all different. Pasadena, Long Beach and Huntington Beach and Santa Monica, like they're all, even being part of the same city, they're all very distinct. And
very much. Did you see the live stream of John Mulaney's Everyone's in LA on Netflix?
Oh, I haven't watched it yet. No.
I've been watching a few of them.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
The kind of cluster that he sort of finds himself into and then gets himself out of throughout the show. It's pretty funny. He's got this first episode's all about coyotes. So he emphasizes a few things about coyotes and different stories of coyotes.
Yeah, I mean, the people we're staying with have a small dog, and they're like, yeah, gotta watch out for coyotes.
Yeah, acutely aware.
Crazy.
Yeah. Not something you typically associate with LA unless you've been there.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
For a while. That's cool, man.
Well, how are you doing this week, John?
I'm good. I'm kind of excited for this short week.
Yeah.
And then I'm gearing up for a vacation. So I'm taking Friday off. So I have, 4-day weekend coming up. But I'm trying to trick myself on Thursday and Friday to be like, you're still going to work, but you're just going to work in your promotion case.
Yeah.
So maybe I can get ahead of that since it's coming up.
Yeah, there you go.
And the way that you have to work so hard to craft like how you meet the criteria and like what you've done and present the impact and all that stuff has been an interesting exercise every time I've tried to do that. So
yeah,
my my wife and son are down in Nicaragua right now. Well, they're in Costa
Oh,
Rica, and then they're driving up to Nicaragua
okay.
tomorrow, and so I'm gonna meet them next week, flying out Tuesday, and then spend 7 or 8 days down there with them and
Heck
enjoying the
yeah.
sun. And it's the wet season down there, so it shouldn't be too hot, which is nice because every time I go down
Yeah.
there, I swear I get dehydrated and it takes a few days to adjust. And it's kind of like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, maybe.
Well, they aren't at altitude, are
No, no, it's not very high altitude. I mean, they have a number of volcanoes that you can
Yeah.
visit, and but like where they live, they're not very high, so
Yeah.
not too bad.
Yeah.
But it's just hot.
Yeah.
It's just hot and dry, and
Yeah. It'll just take it out of you.
something I get used to. Yeah,
Yeah.
but thankfully, it's been so hot here in Texas. Like I've kind of gotten inundated to the extreme heat a little bit.
Yeah, like being out here in LA, it's kind of funny that it's, like 70 degrees and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I need a jacket. It's chilly," because my body is adjusted to it being 30 degrees hotter.
Yeah, 100 degrees at
Pretty big
9
swing.
a.m.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Yeah, that's I'm excited. And so like this might be a leisurely conversation more than anything, just because like my head's it's almost checked out.
It's
Not
in that
fully, but
mode.
it's almost. It's kind of.
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
trying to. So I think I told you this. I started a newsletter, which
Uh-huh.
isn't really a newsletter. It's just like my thoughts on paper for people who
Yeah.
are interested.
Yeah.
And I the last one that went out was yesterday.
Okay.
And I've been trying to like get ahead of the next one, and it was like my head's not there, man.
Yeah.
It's been hard to not just hold myself accountable, but like when you've been working so hard on something and you kind of pull it together, which the last few weeks has been what I've been doing and jumping between, I guess, 3 or 4 different complex projects.
Yeah.
Eventually your brain kind of just says like, okay, I need to rest. Like we're not going to think about that anymore. Have you run into that scenario, and what is that kind of experience like with you when you're trying to do a lot of different things and then you kind of like either crash, or do you have a burnout story or anything like that?
Yeah, so I think
Because everyone handles those differently, and burnout seems to be something that is talked about more often than I ever heard, 10 years ago, 15
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, I mean, so in my opinion, burnout is when you're working hard at something without really understanding or recognizing any payoff or achievement. I think you can work really, really hard at something and you can you can achieve something. And so even if you are like, I'm exhausted, but you have a sense of satisfaction that comes with that, like the amount of effort that you put into it. I feel like burnout is a real struggle when you're working on something, but you feel like you're just spinning your gears. You're like, I'm working so hard at this thing and I feel like I'm getting nowhere.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of that, like with our development teams, sometimes like when we're in bug squashing mode, because with bug squashing, there isn't that sense of like, cool, you finished a new feature and you rolled out this new feature and look at all the new functionality that you've created. There's no finish line when it comes to bugs because there's always another bug. You're on a treadmill, it seems like. And when you don't get that sense of anything, that can really out. But I think what you're talking about feels something different. It's maybe more like what the end is, like this idea of a growing this newsletter and everything like that, and wanting to put good effort into it. Like you want it to be high quality and you want it to say like really what you're thinking.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of work for a payoff that's maybe later on. And, I definitely get that to some extent. And I've definitely been in those places where I'm like, I want to do this thing, a passive income sort of, hobby side thing,
Yeah.
and realizing how much effort and work it takes to build that up.
Oh man.
Writing a book, starting a blog or newsletter, starting a podcast. I remember seeing like anything you want that's passive income takes an impressive amount of work to get done. Earning royalty on a book or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of always stuck with me. But I want to ask the question back to you of what is it about writing the newsletter that feels so like draining?
Mm-hmm.
The amount of effort you're putting into it. And if you put less effort in until it gained more momentum, would it feel less draining?
Oh, see, but that feels counterintuitive a little bit. Oh, there's two things there. Okay, so the first is answering your question of, wait, what was your question? It was I got so distracted with the second part.
Yeah, the first question is like, well, I'm trying to remember what I just said, actually. The first question was like, could you do less? Right.
Oh, what about it is so...
yeah, what about it is so draining?
Draining.
Yeah. Or what makes it such a like the threshold to start working on the next newsletter so high? If you're like, I just finished it.
This is the thing that I'm trying to figure out with my own tendencies. I'm not going to call it weaknesses. I'm going to say tendencies because like I have some pretty strong strengths, and then all of a sudden I'm working towards something, and then it's like that initial burst of energy and motivation to go do it subsides, and it's like, cool, okay, I found, like, now let's get into a rhythm. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to keep playing.
Yeah,
like I just wanted like either the dopamine hit or the creativity spike of that excitement, kind of like carried you into it. And then for me, I've always been more of a thinker than a doer. Like I like contemplating things, and it's like, oh, that's an interesting idea, and then I'll journey down, the research path of figuring that out, or like, is there a solution, or what is the real problem there? And and so that's sort of like where I've started to, okay, let's sort of rein that in to, can you craft something that communicates your ideas or what you find in a way that people can consume and are interested in and they find valuable, which is this whole exercise. And so I think I get to that place sooner in the journey of creating new things. And so my tendency is sort of I've leaned on, if I'm excited about it and if I'm emotional about it, then I'm all in. Yeah. If I'm no longer, because I have to go do something else or I have other responsibilities, then it's easier to sort of like let it drop to the side.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, like, so I've been working on that tendency, and I've been getting better at being consistent, because like that's something that I found that if you want to build anything and find any success, like consistency is the thing that kills most things. And so if you're not consistent, you're already starting at 50% possibility.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I can do that. Like, surely I can commit to doing something consistently. And so, that's where I'm hitting that sort of like plateau of like, okay, are you gonna, now do some of the grind that comes with committing to this, rather than just riding the sugar high of starting it and figuring it out. I like figuring it out. I like putting puzzles together and like, what are all the pieces, and then how do you reconfigure that? And it's like, oh, well, this is my way of doing it. And it's like, cool, I did that. And it's like, and then my brain wants to go on and like not follow through and execute the thing I planned.
Sure.
Or that I created, Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, to answer your question.
Okay.
You going?
Well, because I was gonna say, like, it's this is interesting to me, the juxtaposition between um putting out, say, content like a newsletter or Instagram posts or whatever, and you kind of just have to keep doing it because the algorithm or whatever rewards that consistency. Like that's how you grow an audience and everything is by just having a backlog of great content that people can all of a sudden say like, okay, cool. It's not just this one thing. It's the entire corpus of what they've created is now suddenly very valuable.
Yeah.
That's juxtaposed with, I listened to a Hidden Brain podcast episode that was about habituation and
oh, interesting.
How when we do something for the first time, it sparks, either immense pleasure and joy or potentially great pain. But then over time, that attenuates out and becomes just more, we go back to normal. And it's like a biological thing, right? Because our brain is like, okay, I've gotten used to this new environment and I need to be on alert for whatever new changes are happening in my environment. So I'm used to it being 100 degrees outside now because that's no longer a suddenly changing threat. Like, yes, I'm still miserable and hot and everything. I'm not saying it's comfortable, but I'm saying you stop focusing so much on how hot it is because then you're focused on that next little spike, that dopamine hit like you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, turning this into a question for you and continuing it, how do you balance, or how do you hope to balance the idea of, in order to reach that ultimate reward of having subscribers, good feedback, building a community around your newsletter, how do you have that consistency to build that, while at the same time finding ways to hack against that habituation thing that says, this is just more of the same. We don't really care about this. This isn't rewarding for us anymore. How do you create a reward system that turns consistency not into just habit?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm needing to figure out.
Yeah.
My current strategy, let's say, and we'll see how it works, because it's sort of working with you and what we're trying to do here. And it's I've thought about this because that's usually where I fall apart and I move on and let things go. And so it's like, well, what is the psychological, that's getting back to my tendencies, what's another psychological tendency that makes me commit under difficult circumstances? And it's like, I do have a sense of responsibility when there's someone else depending on me showing up. And so, I've always, not always, but like the work ethic instilled in me at a young age, and being a responsible person, like I've always, like, if you have to, get up at 4 a.m. to show up at work at 5, like whenever I've needed to do that, it's like, okay, I just have to do this.
Yeah.
It's grueling and like you don't like it and it's like whatever. And all the other circumstances where it's like, if I needed to do that and no one else is depending on me, I'm not going to do it. Like going to the gym, for example.
Yeah.
Like I'm the only one affected. It's like, okay, I can accept that for myself.
Yeah.
But, and so in thinking about that, it was okay, I have to do something different in order to get a different result.
Yeah.
So how can I sort of get myself to be held accountable to somebody else to show up and do this, to build that consistency muscle that in me is so weak at the moment, so I can strengthen that up. And so that's part of like the side benefit of starting a podcast with you is every week, okay, we found some initial momentum, so let's keep going. Let's just keep hitting record, and we hit some bumps or whatever, and but we still had conversation. That's like, okay, well, let's anchor on that and let's make it as simple as possible. And we're finding value out of just talking with each other. And so we can hook to that and then build around it. And so then The Fusionist, my newsletter, which is really just like my thoughts on paper. Like I've also struggled with this. It's not really a newsletter. It's not really a blog either. It's a website for me to share like my research and results and new ways of thinking in our technosapien age, which is what I'm sort of staking a claim on. And so I think for me to build a consistency isn't like in the fame or popularism or making money even. Like somehow that's not a motivator to me. Like, yes, I would want to make money, but like, you know, there's like deeper psychological things that I have to tap into and say, okay, I actually need to be held accountable to someone else. Someone else is expecting me to show up. So it's like, okay, I have to get over whatever little excuses I have. And that's helped so far a little bit.
Nice.
How about yourself?
Well, and maybe like I have a follow-up question of what is it that people need to hear from your newsletter?
Mm-hmm.
Framing that question in that, like, I feel like what motivates us is either a need or a want. Like, it's something you really just want to do. It doesn't matter what the result is. It doesn't matter how many subscribers you get. It's like, I just get an innate satisfaction from doing this thing.
Yeah.
Versus like I'm doing this thing because people need it. People need me to do this thing. Which, you know, I don't want it to sound like too conceited or you know, self-centered or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a sense of purpose. Like,
yeah.
You know, what you're describing is, yeah.
I think it's kind of like what you're saying with the accountability piece of, you know, hey, Tom needs me to show up to start this podcast. And so that's very motivating. There's an expectation or an accountability there. And so with your newsletter, I'm, you know, saying it's one of those two things, right? Is it something that you just inherently want to do, even if nobody ever read it? You would just be super proud you did it.
Yeah.
Or what's the need that you're satisfying? Like, that people need to hear this. Like, the world is struggling with a lack of fusion. And I'm, you know, like, it is like, you know, a motivating thing to say it's the accountability of that person who is just waiting to be told or hear like this thought piece that you have.
Yeah.
Both of those things feel like that's where you find your satisfaction or your motivation to do something consistently. And if you're somewhere in this gray, muddy area in between, of course, it's going to feel like, why am I even doing this? I don't want to do this. This is a lot of work, and like it's not paying off how I wanted it to. Yeah. So I'm curious,
not like what a clear want or a clear need.
Yeah. You know, I'm just so maybe I'm curious what you think in your mind when you sit down to write a newsletter. What need are you satisfying for people that gets you to say, I can't wait to push this out to them because they're going to be so glad they heard it. Sort of.
Yeah. I'm still figuring that part of it out because the reason what got me to even consider doing any kind of distribution or any kind of writing is the want part. Like I just want to I would say learn new things, but it's more than that. There's a curiosity around very complex topics of how things interrelate and how they impact each other. And I gravitate towards that. So a while back, I was trying to think about like, okay, what's the next level for myself? What really is, and how do I get there? Like, yes, I can, okay, cool. I can hold a job. and be a product owner. Like that was my last big step, let's say. And so what's the next step? And it was figuring out, I just lost my train of thought. The want, the desire. It was trying to figure out if I was to do any side gig, it should be something that I do in my spare time. That was like common advice I read and heard from others. And I was like, what do I do in my spare time? Watch movies?
Yeah.
Eat? Oh, do I want to be a food blogger? It's like, no, that's like so saturated. No one cares.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be like a critic. So it's like, that's not going to work. So I just kept chewing on that. Like, what do I like? I lounge. I now like take care of the house because like we have a house, and like trying to think through all of these things. What do I just naturally do? I was like, well, I ask questions and I research things, and I started then going down that trail of I just like to put puzzles together because I like very interesting puzzles.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of figuring out that and this was the revelation I had a few weeks ago. I think I mentioned it's like I am constantly going after the edge of knowledge.
Yeah.
Like I want to be at the edge of discovering new things or new perspectives or something that we had never understood before.
Right.
Which is why I like science and why I like, academia and but I like applying those things rather than just like sitting and churning out new discoveries. So it's like I'm in this sort of like weird, I want to know the edge of knowledge, but then I want to know how to apply that more effectively.
Yeah.
And so that's where it kind of got me to attempt at organizing what is the current state of the future. Is I have an idea and I want to sort of like objectively understand the world at a complex level so that I can navigate it better for myself. And so my writing started to just, okay, let's try to formulate that into something that, can be consumed, and like just use writing to organize my thoughts. And then that's kind of what started this whole thing. And that's the want part of this. It's okay, well, I want to learn and understand, human activity across different thresholds and at different scales, because the things we hear on the news and the media that's coming across our screens, like, trust is being almost evaporated if you're not careful. And it's just like, how do you start to take back some of that control?
Yeah.
And so that's where I started formalizing like the shape map idea and, understanding how to approach things that don't have context to put context around them.
Yeah.
And so like that just like sheer desire and passion to like organize that, the complexity of that, and then simplifying it has kind of become a mission of mine.
Yeah.
And then understanding the value of that is where I'm at. Of like, I think it's valuable just for myself, but like now it's the challenge of, is it, who else is it valuable to? Because it's not the clickbaity things that drive on your addictive behavior to like get you to, inspire you to think you're going to read all of these things when in reality you don't have any time for that, right? You don't have any time to read.
Nobody got time
all
for
the
that
stuff that comes around. Yeah. Which is where I fell into it. I was like, okay, so if I am going to do a newsletter, it's really just going to be like something that isn't going to further overwhelm my reader, whoever that audience is.
Right.
And it should be something that helps them organize the world around them more clearly. Like that has sort of become a purpose of mine to figure out how to do that well. And I think it's something that I admire Neil deGrasse Tyson from an astrophysicist perspective. Sure. And he's done that with a series of different things, and Carl Sagan before him around science and the cosmos. And, there's something in the revelation of that that brings clarity. And then you have a better understanding of, again, like what my next move really should be. So,
or even could be.
Yeah.
Like
possibilities.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I I identify with that motivation and feeling as well of, my the core desire is helping people just feel better about their life.
Yeah.
And, seeing people who are like struggling with where they're at and, oh, I don't know that I like this job, or I don't know what I'm going to do next, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, but like, look at the bigger map of where you're at. Like, look at the complexity of all these interconnected things. Is there an opportunity there to create a connection that maybe you weren't aware of, or use a connection that you forgot existed? Like, oh, I'm great at this one thing, and because of this other thing that I am connected to, I can go do this other third thing. And sometimes people just need a little bit of that help of getting out of their head, getting out of their rut and everything. And by talking about, fine dining, somebody may be triggered to say like, yeah, I need to go start that car company that I've always wanted to do, something like that, where they like something about like that fusionist thing is like, this is like that, and so this can also be like that. And I think that's definitely valuable. The tricky part is creating a feedback cycle that rewards, or gives you knowledge or information that like that's working, right? Oh, I need somebody to tell me, hey, that thing that you told me actually came in really handy, and now if you don't have that kind of communication, that conversation, then your motivation starts to taper, because you're like, am I delivering value? So
am I getting through?
Yeah.
Is it resonating with people? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I think that comes back to consistency as well, because I've also come to realize that, from your singular perspective, when you put something out there, you think you have an audience of thousands of people because now it's out there for everybody, when in reality it exists out there, but if no one comes across it, and they're not at a place to be interested in that, and they're not really ready to receive it or even like hear what you're trying to say because they don't know how to apply it, or again, they're not interested, or they're just not at a place to need that, then you really don't have an audience and their attention and them listening. And in order to do that, I think I heard, another, inspirational podcaster, I forget who it was now, but trying to talk about this for young entrepreneurs, or any entrepreneurs really, but certainly younger entrepreneurs, on the, do what your passion is, get things out there, because you don't know when someone will come across your work at the right time for them. And that is, what you're going after. It's not about having everyone react and respond to you just because it's out there. It's like you have to almost wait for when they think of you. And this was like a branding conversation. And it's like marketing is all about being present in people's minds so that they recall you when they need it. Right. And so you have to be present, which is part of the consistency piece of this, of being available, so that people are like, oh, that Tom guy had a really interesting point on the situation I'm in right now that I heard about 2 or 3 years ago, and it always stuck with me. Or, it's like, I've never been in this situation, but I know who has, because I just happened to come across this article someone sent me, or whatever. And so that has been a motivator for me to get away from the imposter syndrome, or to get over the fear of failure. Because if you don't have the feedback mechanism of knowing that you're contributing value, you're not nearly motivated. And so for me, that always sort of like, okay, well, let's just fit that as let's of those fears, let's cap that with you have to be present first, which means you just have to be out there. So just be happy with what you're doing and keep doing that and finding the things that you're happy with. And if you don't post every day, who cares? Like, that's not your job.
Yeah.
Isn't to post every day. Maybe to get started is to post once a month, or you figure out a series of things. Like, you got to find the way that you work best, which is what I'm having to do, and then figure out little baby steps to stretch yourself, which is, okay, I think I can commit to once a month. I can like post something, write something once a month.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's good or not, that's the part I kind of have to get over, because it's like something is better than nothing, even if it's like half-baked ideas are probably not great to put out into the world unless you put the right context around them. Like, I've been considering this.
Yeah.
And here's my thing. It's not to like answer the whole question. But that's scary, And I think I posted this recently that a few people have appreciated, at least on LinkedIn. And it's the building something in public is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I've always been a proponent to like think deeply and be satisfied with just thinking deeply on my own.
Sure.
And then now it's like, well, okay, maybe I can contribute this. Maybe people will find it valuable. And then I want to be timid and be like, I don't know. So for like the last few years, it's kind of been that I don't know should I do this?
Yeah.
Now I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to. And
Good.
I found something recently too that what got me over that hump was that my FOMO of not reaching my goals surpassed my fear of failing.
Sure.
Like I had this isn't good enough, or I'm not good enough, or like I can't contribute consistently. And then it got to a point where it's like, yes, but like if I don't do something, and if I want to, wherever I want to get to and be a type of person or contribute value at these other stages, like sitting on an executive board, all of a sudden became a goal. Like this year at some point, I was like, you can do that. I want to do that.
Yeah.
And I was like, but I can't do that if I don't make a name for myself of some type.
Right.
And then figure that out. And so now it's like, you know what? I need to do this in public. I need to put my thoughts out there. I need it to be criticized. I need the feedback to sharpen those ideas so that I become better and that those ideas become more valuable, because it's no longer just a stone. It can become, it becomes a hammer.
Yeah.
I use a weapon analogy, but a tool all of a sudden that can build things. And that for me is a bigger purpose when it comes to like whatever my next move is should move towards that bigger purpose. And that's all part of this journey. So,
well, and I think there's potentially a tie to that adage of like, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And combining that with like the sort of agile mentality of, pushing back on that, like, well, come up with a complete list of requirements and designing the perfect system on paper, and then go out and start coding it, and then it'll be perfect when you're done. Yeah. We realize that from a technical standpoint, that never happens. There'll always be something in the code that doesn't work. And B, by the time you've finished coding to all your requirements, you realize that the requirements have changed. Your customers want something completely different, or they never wanted that thing in the first place.
Yeah, you thought it was just this one little you or your group or your misunderstanding.
Yeah. And so, I remember years ago hearing like that another adage, ideas are worthless, execution is everything. And you have to do it. But then I also remember like saying, share your idea with as many people as possible. And that always worried me because of like intellectual property stuff, hey, I got this app idea. What do you think? And then all of a sudden someone's like, that's a great idea. I have more coding experience than you.
And more resources to go do that. Yeah. Zuckerberg.
Yeah. But, on the flip side, I remember a buddy of mine he had coded with his brother or something, this was in like 2010, 2011. but he had coded a like iTunes streaming mirroring thing where he's like, I can get you to play music from your iTunes on multiple computers that also have iTunes on them.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah, but I remember he was like, "Do you want to sign? I need you to sign an NDA before I like demo it to you and show
Oh,
you."
wow. Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, wait a minute. Like, I'm not seeing anything proprietary. You're just showing me the idea of what you've built already.
Yeah.
Why are you like you're making me sign an NDA?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you should just be showing this to as many people as possible." Because now looking back on it, I'm like, hey, this is impressive, the technological feat that you've done here, but
Mm-hmm.
what's the use case for it? Like,
Yeah.
I don't ever want to play iTunes on more than one computer,
Typically.
you know.
Yeah.
So, by keeping his idea locked behind a wall as a way of trying to protect it, he also didn't realize that his idea wasn't the value wasn't being realized because of its disconnection from the people the idea was supposed to be serving. Right.
Yeah. And realizing that what you just described is kind of what um the any what do you call the Echo device or the Google Home device?
Oh, yeah,
But it's
yeah,
really, but it's from the same account, but it's effectively the same thing, which is
yeah,
a better use case. It's actually not multiple iTunes accounts. It's just
yeah.
multiple devices. And
Which
now
is,
I can stream on multiple devices because that is far more
yeah,
valuable use case to people because that's what they want to do. I want it throughout my whole house, not
and now you're talking,
not in one house and my friend's house. Like
yeah,
right? Like there's not often a case where you would need multiple accounts
right.
to be streaming at the same time. So,
Well, yeah, and so now you're talking about the value of a fusionist again, which, a product manager is like sort of needs some of those fusionist skills, right? Is that saying like, look, my design team and all of these people are getting all of this like customer feedback and market feedback and everything. I see the capability of our product right now, but it's not where it needs to be, or there's a different value or a different use somewhere else.
yeah.
I want to say that like it's like Flickr, the photo thing. It started as a like a forum or a blog posting service, and suddenly people realized like, oh, but the photo sharing in this is top notch. And then Flickr pivoted, and they basically, and this is the whole pivot thing that was all rage back in the day. But that's what we're talking about is that like, hey, this one thing that we thought was valuable is now suddenly valuable in a different way, and we need to pivot over to that different way. Are we agile enough to A, recognize what that is, and B, actually make that shift and move? And there's a lot to unpack there, but anyway, I think tying it back to like your newsletter, I think there's that fusionist is the type of person that there's value in itself, but I think there's value in training. I don't know what the training would look like, but training people to have that same sort of mentality.
Yeah, I think so too.
Not locking yourself behind something, but like actually being out there and fusing together all these diverse perspectives. And I'll wrap up that thought with I can't remember if I've mentioned this before. The Chicago metro area did a study years ago on the cost of segregation, both racial and economic, and basically saying like, if we did a comparison of cities that are fairly segregated, meaning from a using an indexing algorithm to say like how similar or dissimilar are two things from one another, looking at it on racial and economic lines, does one group of people like consistently go over here and another group is over here versus are they fairly well mixed? And what's the difference between cities that are very divided like that versus cities that are very well mixed up? And it basically said like there's like people across the board are better off in an integrated city because you have so many more of those random abilities and connections and you have something to fuse off of, right? And so you're able to take advantage of so many more things by being diverse, as opposed to if you're like more segregated, if you're isolated from a bunch of interesting other things and you're just in kind of your echo chamber of, well, this is what I have to work with. You're not going to find that new market. Your product is going to go stale. You're not going to realize a new future for yourself if we're going to.
Yeah, you're going to hit ceilings much quicker too.
Yeah. So you're going to miss out on like the point of this podcast. What's your next step?
Yeah.
You're going to struggle to find like how to fuse all the things that are out there into something that like can inform you. Oh, yeah. Cool. Here's where my pull is. I'm being pulled towards this thing. Instead of like trying to ramrod your way into it because you don't have enough information.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're going to get blindsided because you're not being aware of what the motivation of market shifts are.
Yeah.
Right. It's one thing to be like, oh, this new technology, LLMs, have you heard of it? And it's like, yeah, dude, like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And then you talk to other people, like, again, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I've been watching a lot of him lately. So, but, the conversations around AI, and it was like, yeah, we've been using it for decades now.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Our and it's always around the question of like the threat of AI. And I was like, no, like anything that can help automate the analysis of the huge amounts of data that they collect from satellites and imagery, and always looking into the universe to find answers. And how do you break those things down through complex mathematics and physics analysis? Like he's like, we use it to help advance the way, like the new knowledge that we can discover and make sense of the universe we're in. And that's sort of like, we need to do that, maybe not at a universal level, but like in our own world sort of level, and recognize that it overlaps with so many other things.
Yeah.
And one of the main premises, is it a premise? Hypothesis maybe that I'm putting out there, that is that because of the way that digital media is so present, ever present, through our screens and through the devices and digital products that we use, you now need to be far more aware of many other things to think critically about what you're receiving. You think about it at different scales. That's where like the shape map and the 7 spheres of human activity, proximity, and engagement came from, right? As a simple way to think about like the grandness of where humans are and what we interact with.
Yeah.
In a very simplified framework.
Yeah.
That Mary Lou stumped me as soon as I shared it with her. She's my manager now. And so when I first shared it with her, she was like, well, how would you apply it? And I was like, I don't know. Let me think about that.
Yeah.
And so I've sort of been unpacking that. It's like, oh, here's how you would start to apply it.
Well, yeah, and I think that gets back to kind of where we started the conversation, right? Of, okay, so what are you putting into your newsletter that people can apply?
Yeah.
Where they're like, this, in doing so, has a tangible like feedback to you of, look at, people are applying this thing that I'm writing about. I'm motivated to write the next thing.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have an answer to that.
But
I
that's what I'm hoping to find out in the next Well, we started the second half of the year. So between now and Christmas, I'm hoping to hear some feedback on that. I do have a few initial subscribers, which I'm super grateful for. That's been motivating to be like, okay, cool. Maybe I should keep doing this.
Yeah.
But I sort of figured that out in the last post. Can I read a summary of the fusionist paradigms that I started to pull together?
You absolutely can.
It's sort of, I don't know if it answers this. To me, it answers it, which is why I think I need to say it out loud and get your reaction to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been thinking about context around this is I've been thinking about where am I coming from and why should people even consider whatever it is that I put out there. But also like what would my argument be of like why I think this is a valuable thing. So it sort of answers what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And I phrased it like this. So by analyzing typical human behavior, placemaking techniques, and systems mechanics, we can explore the root drivers of any system and therefore frame scenarios for how changes in those systems may ripple across others. And the value for people that I am trying to craft is a simplified understanding of how large systems with like millions of variables, let's say, might impact the individual, but also how the individual can take back some of the control from those systems' influences on their world. And so as I was thinking about this, breaking my quote, well, the first part of that was a quote anyway. Thinking about this, I started writing down like, what is just like the base knowledge of where I'm coming from? And I came out with 12, what I'm calling 12 foundational methods and paradigms. And we've talked about a few of these. Complexity theory is one of them. Design thinking, like product mindset, computational thinking. Exclusively like something that is novel that I created is what I'm calling ripple detection. So I probably talk about it a lot whenever we talk. But things like that, it's like, okay, people might be interested in this, and people who are interested in those things might be interested in what I'm saying, which was another part of like trying to find my audience and figuring out this next big move of mine. So there you go. That's sort of the closest I've gotten so far, and what I'm hoping people can take away from whatever it is I write, and the need part of the equation that you talked about earlier. What they hear.
So, I want to keep hearing more about, these, your 12 principles and everything like that. Because I think I'm really fascinated by, I'm going to use our typical like discovery, like product discovery stuff that we talk about, where we have a bunch of different activities, right? We can do mind mapping, we can do user experience workflow, we can do affinity maps, all that kind of stuff. We have all these things in our toolbox, and it's having all of them in the toolbox that makes it valuable. Like it's not just saying like, well, I know how to use a hammer. It's like, well, that's great, but when you show up to go fix something, you also need to learn how to use a screwdriver and a flashlight, and you need to learn how to use a screwdriver, a flashlight, and a hammer all at the same time in a way that actually produces a result that's unique to that combination, as opposed to if you used a rock or ratchet set and a flare or something. I don't know, right? But the idea being, you have these 12 concepts, and to Mary Lou's point, how do you apply them? And it's like, well, I don't think it's just as simple as, well, when you apply design thinking, you get this value. When you apply, it's like, no, here's a situation where I'm using design thinking, complexity theory, and ripple detection as that combination, and it's going to give me this kind of thing. And I could just as easily use 2 or 3 other different concepts when thinking about this situation. And so I think I want to continue to explore that sort of framework that
Mm.
you have
Mm-hmm.
as a way of saying, like, cool, now how do we train people on a much general and broader scale about
Yeah.
using different things from their toolbox? Even just, do you
Yeah.
know what's in your toolbox, right?
Yeah.
Do you know
And you
what's
identify.
available to you?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a very prescient question to say, but how do I apply it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the second part, or the latter part of, do you even know what is in your toolbox, is something that's interesting to me, coming from architecture, where, like, through the whole university experience, you pick up skills that, to be a good architect, to design buildings well, to design them safely, to get them done, like, you understand like more than two handfuls worth of specialties that any one of them people spin off into entire careers.
Yeah.
And I recently connected with someone on LinkedIn that I think wrote a book after architecture, where it's basically this thing where it's like taking the skills that we've learned and apply them outside the field, because we end up bringing like bits and pieces, and you sort of feel the need to semi-specialize in each of them to do architecture well.
Yeah.
And so at some point, my wife and I, we both came through the architecture program and got our masters, and not really happy with the industry. So we both were like, how else can we use the skills we pulled together? And we started figuring out what's in our toolbox and breaking that down, and came to that realization of, like, people they make like easily 6 figures almost coming out of college, specializing in some of the skills that we have to learn, and like storytelling and animation and like 3D modeling. Some of the research methodologies that you can pick up through the right program. And so it was like, why aren't we doing those things? And so that's where we sort of like started figuring this out.
Cool.
Anyway, doing that kind of opened up our eyes on what the next move for us would be. So I'd love to talk about more of what you mentioned.
Let's do it.
Talk about. So
sounds good.
Awesome, man. Well, this is great.
All right, John. Have a great rest of the
week.
week.
LA, man. Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy Independence Day.
Happy Independence Day. Enjoy your vacation as well, your 4-day weekend. And maybe we'll do a special episode from Nicaragua next week. Who knows?
Maybe. Yeah. I'll have stuff with me, so we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, man. Take it easy.
All right, John. Have a good day. Talk to you later.
See ya. Bye. Thank you for listening to My Next Big Move. I'm Jonathan Essery with Tom Morrison. We'll see you next time.